The people of modern Japan still find a place for many of their traditional arts in today's technological society. Texts on strategy, written by the warriors of the Middle Ages, are still essential reading for businessmen, whilst tens of thousands of Japanese men and women consider the practice of archery and swordplay a vital part of their personal development. This film, shot both in Japan and at the Royal Armouries Museum, gives us a glimpse into some of the accomplishments of Japan's military past.
The famed samurai warrior fought on foot with sword and bow.
The Japanese bamboo bow was also shot from horseback, but it was of a very unusual shape, the lower limb of the bow being shorter than the upper limb. Typical of the nation's approach, there is a ceremony attached to the bow's use, where the spiritual is combined with the military ethos of the weapon. There are 8 stages in shooting the Japanese bow, and great stress is laid on this ritual. The Japanese archer believed accuracy was most important and restricted himself to a few carefully aimed shots. Kyudo, the way of the bow, is a discipline celebrated in Japan today. Every spring, Japan celebrates a tradition that is hundreds of years old. The festival takes place in the spectacular scenery at the Nikko to Shogu Shrine, renowned for its beauty and air of peace. The shrine is one of the most famous in Japan and is designated a national treasure. Among the 55 buildings are superb carvings and statues of archers. Today, a very special form of mounted archery called Yabusame is still practiced at the shrine and is performed as a sacred rite. Training begins in the gymnasium, where novice archers practice first on a wooden horse, aiming their bow at a soft target. The reality of Yabusame is far more testing. Shooting at a small cedarwood target from a galloping horse is a test of riding and shooting skills, needing considerable physical and spiritual concentration by the archer.
In Japan, Yabusame developed as a noble courtly pastime. It survives as a reminder of the importance to this and all Asian cultures of the bow as a hunting weapon and a weapon of war. For thousands of years, the horse archers of the Asian steppes dominated the continent. But this dominance was surely based, like the skills of the English archer, upon constant practice. For without practice, day in and day out, the strength, balance and coordination required to undertake the very difficult task of drawing and shooting a bow swiftly and accurately from a galloping horse could not be maintained. The Asian composite bow was one of the most successful weapons the world has ever seen, but only in the hands of an expert horseman who was also a highly skilled archer.
The training sessions begin with the formal dressing, starting with the woven and lacquered bamboo hats, the kishigasa. The shape of these date from the middle of the 18th century, when Yabusame enjoyed a revival in Japan. The priests bind their wrists with leather thongs. Yabusame archers shoot arrows with bulbous tips. They are derived from whistling arrows which make an eerie sound when they are shot. The placing of these arrows in the correct position is crucial, as they need to be drawn quickly and shot rapidly on the day. The practice session continues on the wooden horse. Here, the Yabusame archer begins to experience a disorientating movement designed to focus his attention on himself and his bow. The spiritual aspect is vital. The speed at which the real archery takes place needs considerable mental application. Even in the training stages, the priest is careful to move slowly and not feel rushed or lose his concentration. He must feel at one with the target, so there is no distance between him and it. Practicing without the reins is the first test. The ritual cry sets the horse going, and the archer carefully aims and shoots his bow. Next, the trickiest movement, drawing another arrow in one deliberate move before aiming again. If these actions are not fully harmonized, the chances of hitting the target are remote. The Japanese believe the twang of a bowstring and the whistle of the arrow chases away evil spirits. And the ritual cries are designed to drive demons away. A spring festival procession makes its way towards the shrine to commemorate its foundation. Yabusame riders and attendants, officials, local dignitaries, priests and visitors dressed in sumptuous traditional costumes make their way up the hill. Since Yabusame was introduced to the shrine in 1953, growing numbers of visitors have been attracted to this unique event. The archers make their way to the course. Each rider wears special ceremonial robes which derive from early hunting clothes. Each garment has its own significance. The legs are tied with braided silk and the hands are covered with soft doeskin gloves secured at the wrist. Deerskin chaps protect the legs. A padded silk sleeve protects the arm from the bowstring. The sword tied round the archer's waist is the traditional weapon of the samurai warrior. It's a great honor to participate in Yabusame, and as the moment approaches, the tension is mounting. The event begins with the reading of a prayer, asking the gods to protect the archers who will perform Yabusame. The first rider opens the festival holding the ceremonial fan. The fan signals the track is clear and purified of bad spirits. The first run begins. The archer must be galloping before he can draw and shoot as the fan falls to the ground. There are 3 targets, about 70 meters apart and about 3 meters from the track. They are very difficult to hit. The rider's style and speed are considered by the judges. The rider has to stand in his stirrups throughout. He's really in a standing crouch, knees wide apart and heels gripping the horse's sides. It's a very tricky technique to master. The next rider sets off shouting "Inyo," an invocation to aid his concentration. The cedarwood targets are made even more difficult to hit in the grey afternoon and a typically seasonal downpour of rain. The reward is a silk sash referring symbolically to the deeds of the great samurai archers of the past. To hit the target, the bow must be high and vertical. The arrows are collected. The draw must be with the whole body, not just the arms. This is the ancient and sacred art of Japanese Yabusame. Shinto priests practice the spiritual and mental disciplines that continue to make Yabusame both a distinctive and unique form of mounted archery. In one concentrated and intense moment, body and spirit combine in the archer's mind to shoot a perfect arrow. Months of methodical practice, learning the difficult skills of drawing and shooting the special Japanese bow, come to fruition in a brief moment. To shoot when bow and body are in precisely the right balance to hit the target. And at the end of the short run, a time to reflect. Yabusame, with its combination of mental and physical energy, echoes the special qualities the samurai warriors valued. During the 14th century, mounted archery declined in importance as a result of the lessons learnt during 2 attempted invasions by the Mongols. From this time onwards, much of the fighting was done on foot, necessitating a change in the style of armour and bringing staff weapons and the sword into greater prominence. Some idea of the equipment of the time can be gained by a demonstration performed regularly by one of the interpreters at the Royal Armouries Museum. Early schools of swordsmanship taught a series of set moves designed to counter the attacks a warrior might face on the battlefield. To avoid the inevitable accidents that took place when training with real blades, the schools encouraged the use of wooden weapons, but there were still injuries and even fatalities. The Nikko Toshogu Shrine is one of Japan's most important, dedicated to the first modern shogun. Here, young Shinto priests are quietly preparing to practice the exhilarating and dynamic art of kendo, a unique and very traditional style of Japanese fencing. Kendo is one of the most popular of all Japanese martial arts. It is swordplay, but using bamboo swords rather than real ones. The armour has an unfamiliar look to Western eyes. The jacket, or kendo-gi, is cotton. The split trousers, the hakama, give complete freedom of movement, and the helmet, or men, protects the throat, shoulders, and the back of the head. Hands and hips are also covered. The priests are taught that awareness of the opponent and knowing what he may do next is the key discipline. This is achieved through clear thought and a determined spirit. The noise the fighters make is also traditional. The shout or kiai charges the fighter's adrenaline and boosts energy, concentrating the mind and body at the moment of impact. Etiquette and order return at the end of the fight, and in the traditional Japanese way, each bows to the shrine and then to each other. Over the centuries, sword practice with wooden sticks developed into a martial art that teaches self-discipline, self-knowledge, and courage. But it's only important today because the sword itself has remained vital to Japanese culture. Many Japanese still own ancestral swords and pass them down from generation to generation as they have always done.
And because of this, they still continue to commission them as heirlooms for future generations.
The sword acquired a religious and symbolic significance because its manufacture involved the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Even today, many swordsmiths have a Shinto shrine in their workshops and make their devotions every morning before starting work. The Japanese sword has been described as the most efficient cutting weapon ever devised. The raw material for the blade is a crude mixture of iron, steel, and slag from the blast furnace. The smith selects the best pieces, flattens them, and stacks them on a steel plate fitted with a handle. To keep the pieces together until they can be fused in the fire, the stack is wrapped in wet paper. When hot enough, the pieces can be welded into a solid block. Straw, ash, and clay slurry are used throughout the forging process to avoid burning too much of the metal. The block of crude metal is refined and its carbon content adjusted by repeated folding and welding. After notching the block, the metal is hammered onto a wet anvil to clean out impurities. Hammering and folding the metal drives out the slag, homogenizes the metal, and reduces the carbon content. The smith will repeat this process up to a dozen or more times until he judges the carbon content and homogeneity of the piece of metal he's working on suitable for the position it will occupy in the finished blade. bundle of wet straw is judged to have the same resistance as a human body. There are several ways in which different grades of steel can be combined into a blade. In this example, 3 grades will be used: a soft iron for the core, a high carbon steel for the cutting edge, and the 2 side plates of medium carbon steel. The individual pieces are tacked together, sand or borax being added to the joint to act as a flux. Finally, the welds are completed by further hammering. The solid but composite block is drawn out into a bar the approximate size of a blade. Using a small hammer, the smith shapes the point, thins the edge and forms the ridge that is a feature of most blades. The rough shaping will be completed with a coarse file and a draw shave. A unique feature of the Japanese sword is that only the cutting edge is hardened. This will be visible on the finished blade as a misty white region. Differential hardening is achieved by coating the blade with a mixture of clay, charcoal and powdered stone, making the clay layer thicker along the back, which is to be kept soft. The junction between the thick and thin regions is shaped in a pattern that is often a characteristic of the smith. The blade is heated in a darkened smithy so that the temperature of the steel can be judged by the colour. When the blade is evenly heated to the right temperature, it's plunged edge downwards into water, acquiring some of its curve from the different contraction rates of the hard and soft regions. Should the hardening have been successful, the smith will sign the blade on the tang with his name and sometimes his place of work and the date. The blade is now passed to a specialist polisher who uses a series of a dozen or more stones to give the blade its precise shape and razor-sharp edge. For the coarser shaping stones, the blade is rubbed on the stones with water as a lubricant. The finer stones, in the form of small flakes, are held under the thumb and rubbed on the blade to reveal the details of the forging and hardening. The scabbard is made of carefully seasoned magnolia wood that will not scratch the delicate polish and contains oils that will prevent rust. A cavity is cut into the two halves and checked to ensure the blade doesn't rub at any point. When satisfied with the fit, the two halves are glued together with rice paste, shaped externally, and the scabbard passed to a lacquerer for its decorative outer finish. The hilt, too, is of magnolia, fitted tightly to the tapered tang of the blade. The wood is covered with skin from the back of a species of ray. Paper is pasted to the back of the skins to prevent the colour of the wood showing through. They are then pasted to the hilt and will be bound in silk braid or thread in one of the many standard wrappings. The sword is completed by metal hilt fittings and a sword guard made by yet another artist craftsman. The final stage in the assembly is the insertion of a bamboo or horn peg that locks the blade into the hilt. Highly skilled craftsmen, working in a tradition unbroken for centuries, have created a weapon that has been called the soul of the samurai. Whilst modern Japan enters the 21st century as one of the world's most technologically advanced countries, there are still people devoted to keeping alive the traditions that made the military class of old Japan unique in the world.